Welcome everyone to this webinar and release of the study, Reaction to Crisis, Adult Higher Education's Lessons Learned. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so grateful that so many people could be part of this release and to share with you today key findings and actionable steps to improve the experiences for adult learners. I'm Robin Smith from the DeBruce Foundation. I'm so pleased to welcome you to this timely and important topic. Our mission at DeBruce Foundation is expanding pathways to economic growth and opportunity. And we funded this study because for many adults, getting a higher education degree or certificate can be an economic game changer. And we care about smoothing out that path for adult learners. So before jumping into some of the substance, I want to take care of a few housekeeping items. One, we do encourage a lively chat. And so if you would like everyone to see your comments, please make sure you're indicating all panelists and attendees. And we're going to be having time at the end of our session together for question and answers. So drop your questions in the chat at any time, and we will look forward to addressing as many as we can at the end. There's also going to be a full copy of the report and a summary fact sheet available at debruce.org at the conclusion of today's presentation. And as we look forward to the panelist discussion, I want to introduce who the research team is, as well as letting you know that this work was led by researchers at the Urban Education Research Center at UMKC, in particular, Dr. Karen Chang and Jenny Frenzel, as well as their colleagues who are going to be joining us today. And some of those are, the first person we're going to hear from is Dr. Scott Campbell. He is Vice President, Partnership Development at CALE. And he's going to set the stage by telling us more about adult learners and how this study was conducted. And he'll be followed by Dr. Roysanne Collins, who is an associate professor at K-State. And she's going to explain the study's recommendations and the related action steps. And her comments are going to be followed by Dr. Beth Tankersley-Bankhead, who is president and CEO of KC Scholars. And she's going to discuss how campuses are actually implementing findings and serving adults during these challenging times. As I mentioned, after the remarks, we'll have time for question and answers. So let's jump in. And Dr. Campbell, I hand the baton off to you.
Thank you so much, Robin. You know, on the eve of the pandemic, Kansas City Scholars and CALE had just completed the Adult Learner 360 with 8 of the Kansas City Scholar institutions. The AL 360 is a diagnostic that helps colleges and universities and systems understand how well they serve adult populations or where there are performance gaps. As we were considering the results and implications for the Adult Learner 360s, the pandemic was starting to grip us all in a way that impacted some of our most basic ways of operating. The natural extension question was, were the Adult Learner 360 results still accurate and relevant? And more broadly, how has COVID-19 affected adult learners? And how can institutions address adult learner needs during this unique time? These are important questions to answer and to better understand. From a quantitative perspective, we know that adult learners 25 plus make up about 25% of undergraduate students and 75% of graduate students. 32.4%, almost a third of all post-secondary students are, in our definition, adult learners. If we look beyond age-related descriptions, if we categorize traditional students as those who are between the ages of 18 and 24, who live on campus and attend classes full-time and are financially dependent on their parents, non-traditional students make up about 75% of enrollment. Clearly, the educational outcomes of non-traditional learners will determine the ultimate outcome of post-secondary institutions that serve them. At the moment, the impact of COVID-19 on enrollment is unclear. We know that in fall 2020, undergraduate enrollments are down 4.4%. Community colleges enrollments are down more than 9%. A WICHE report predicts that beginning in 2026, a long period of decline in the number of high school graduates will begin. So enrollment, retention, and completion policies that are effective among adult learners will be critical. Now, fortunately, for post-secondary institutions, it's a target-rich environment. There are at least 35 million adults who have some credit and no degree, and more than twice that, more than 70 million who have not even attempted post-secondary education. So for the purposes of this study, the focus groups were conducted over a 90-day period in the fall of 2020. 16 higher education institutions participated, about half of which were public, half were private, 4 of which were 2-year institutions, 12 of which were 4-year institutions. Almost all of them were primarily in-person types of institutions, although we had 2 primarily online institutions. If we look at the adult learners who participated, there were 61 adult learners that participated in 7 focus groups. About 3/4 of those were female, and we had a good mix of race and ethnicity, as well as age ranges between 20 and as high as 60. If we look at the faculty and staff that participated, there was 82 faculty and staff that participated in 11 focus groups. Their roles ranged from student services to executive leaders to faculty and to admissions professionals. Even in good economic times, working adults have a lot to manage. During the pandemic, schedule strain has increased as adult learners try to balance childcare, homeschooling, and upskilling, or reskilling in the cases of job loss and unemployment. We are just now beginning to learn the extent to which the global pandemic is disproportionately impacting first generation and students of color as they struggle to reach their academic and career goals. At this time, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Royce-Ann Collins, to share the specific findings and recommendations for our study.
Thank you, Scott. As you can imagine, this focus group created several outcomes, but 4 major themes emerged from our actions. And so let's start with the first one. As you can imagine, technology was a frustration for everyone, faculty, staff, and students. And so we really honed in on the first one to enhance faculty development and establish technological support for faculty, staff, and students. The pandemic exposed major weaknesses in our technological skills and our support for faculty development. There were institutions and faculty who did not know how to teach online, and people were fast and furious trying to help everyone convert to an online course. So it exposed the fact that we don't have faculty developed in online pedagogy. It also showed that we don't always adopt the learning management system that the college actually supports. So when there's an array of ways in which an online program can be delivered, it creates problems for staff and the students. And so we need more training for our faculty, and we need more training for our staff as they're suddenly using technology that they don't have anyone around to help them with. And our adult learners, they really needed an orientation to our learning management systems. To do everything in our courses as consistently as possible would have helped them navigate these things. And another thing that this exposed was the fact that we really have inequity in our Wi-Fi access. We interviewed students in focus groups that were in rural areas that were trying to connect with us over satellite, dial-up. It was very difficult for them. And when we suddenly pushed all the education to an online format, as you can imagine, it was very frustrating for them. Our second recommendation moves towards making timely decisions and consistent decisions about course delivery and fees. Now, transparency and decision-making is really significant no matter where we are, but in these times when there was a pandemic, we really needed that particular piece. And students needed consistent fees. We interviewed students that were talking about fees changing, fees moving away, then coming back. So making those decisions, sticking with them, and moving forward with that. And also staying focused on what would really work best for the student when you're looking at these things. It was very frustrating when things were different from department to department. And you know, one of the things that the students really needed was this consistent course delivery. And you would think that we asked them if they wanted a certain delivery and we would try to accommodate them, but really the students with the less stress had the ones that the institution said, all the courses will be online, all the courses will be face-to-face, and students knew where to go for their schedule. When we said, okay, this course is going to be face-to-face and this one's going to be online, it was the logistics that caused the problems. So how am I going to a face-to-face course and suddenly to an online when all the buildings are closed? Where do I go to connect to the online? How do I get connection to a Wi-Fi? So thinking about the logistics behind that for the student was really exposed here. The third major area is communication, and establishing clear communication paths and ensuring the communication targets the audience. I know that sounds like we've said that over and over about many different things, but I would say this is where we did mail blasts, right? We blasted this message out to everyone, even though it was really directed at different audiences. And you know, students started saying, doesn't apply to me, doesn't apply to me, doesn't apply to me. And so they were trying to shift through them. We thought they'll sift through it, they'll find their message, but they couldn't. And so many students missed, for instance, getting CARES Funds Act because they missed the emails. They didn't see the messages that were coming at them. There was so much. So customizing, having those listservs where these go to our target audience or residence hall, and this one goes to our adult learners, because we know that population is coming one night a week, or we know that population is online, but really targeting what's the message and making sure it hits the right audience. The final one is really dealing with mental health and stress. And as you can imagine, the pandemic exposed that in all of us, the faculty, staff, and students. And early on, we heard stories about, in the spring semester, institutions contacting students and faculty and staff and really trying to make sure they were okay. But you know what we did? We forgot about that in the fall semester. So when we were talking to them in the fall, they were saying, I'm floundering out here. There's no one for me to go to. If an adult learner doesn't have that advisor that they have a personal relationship with, that they can go to and say, I don't know what to do, they will drop out of school and they will leave. So we need touch points, we need relationship building, and we need to stay in contact with our staff as well. The staff and faculty where they had departments that pulled them together at least once a month and just said, how are you doing? Let's drink coffee together. They had decreased stress. They really understood that someone cared about them. We needed human beings and we needed connections with each other. And sometimes we forgot that's the most important thing. And I'm going to turn it over to Beth Tankersley Bankhead to talk further about this.
Thank you, Royce-Ann. And I also want to acknowledge Camry Ivory and Eric Thompson from Casey Scholars, as they helped as our campuses had the opportunity to participate in the Adult Learner 360. And again, for this study, adult learners and staff from 8 different institutions, many of them with satellite campuses, participated. And you see the names of the institutions there. And as the title of today's briefing says, Campuses use these findings to take actionable steps to support our adult learners even more during the pandemic. And the findings drove the actions, as should happen, and that's why we're sharing these actions with a broad audience today, hoping that this also is informative elsewhere. And there are 4 themes for the actions that campuses shared that they have taken. The first theme is around technology. And so we've heard about technology, Roseanne talked about it. Our campuses understood this challenge, and many of our campuses like MCC and Donley offered loaner laptops to our adult learners. 1, because they might not have had a laptop, or 2, perhaps they were sharing their single laptop with many other members in the same household. So having access to a laptop let our adults focus on the courses. And as Donley shared in the quote to the right, they learned early on and said, the needs of our adults are very different than the needs of our traditional students, and our adults need laptops, and especially as the courses shifted to an online environment. The second theme that the campuses shared focuses around course scheduling and format. And so many of our campuses refined their courses, the delivery, the scheduling. In particular, Metropolitan Community College said, you know, we realize we need to be flexible. Our classes need to be accessible, especially during this time. And so they mapped out courses and completions of entire studies of programs of study that would occur during a specific time frame. So the adults understood that. They also said, we're going to guarantee that our classes will run. We all know that sometimes in higher education, if a class doesn't fill, it may be canceled and scheduled for the next semester, but MCC said the class will run. And then MCC, as did other campuses, shifted their classes for adults to occur on specific evenings so the adults could anticipate. And in the quote on the right, Dr. Catherine Swanson of MCC said they in fact saw that adult attendance and participation in the classes increased during this time because it was a consistent time of week, of evening, and they had the technology to participate. Other campuses, such as UCM, said we increased our online presence. We delivered more of our general education courses online. And in fact, we're considering right now, can we move some of our undergraduate degree programs wholly online, not just now for the pandemic, but continually. And then Johnson County Community College had a similar thing. They said, we've offered a variety of course offerings, and in fact, we're going to continue to do that and be flexible with our scheduling. And UCM noted also that they've been approving more online certificate and credential offerings to make this accessible to adults. The third theme that our campuses shared is around policy, procedure, and practice. And all of our campuses, all 8 that participated in the Adult Learner 360, formed advisory groups. And those advisory groups are comprised of individuals in various units on the campus, and they are considering all of the findings, prioritizing and deciding on which can we act next. So this campus-wide approach was critical and was already in place or being formed when the pandemic did hit. MCC also said, as did UCM, that they really took a look at extending and being more accessible in terms of prior learning and how many credits would be awarded for that, and including some additional individual advising around prior learning. And this helps our adults to retain and then also to persist and quicker time to completion of degree. And then for the fourth theme, simply calling it general support. And so the thing I really like here is the first bullet point. And MCC shared with us that an adult learner actually formed a non-traditional student club. So what we see here is adults were taking initiative and acting to provide support to one another. And then MCC also indicated that they held specific orientations for their adult learners, and they also shifted some of their teaching and learning methodology to be specific to adults. And then all of our campuses, and Roy-San, you mentioned it, and Scott, you did too, all of our campuses were being sure to reach out to the adults, to keep a pulse on it, to ask, how are you doing? What do you need? Rather than simply assuming that the services they had in place were the ones that should continue during this time. So campuses were doing this via personal calls, via surveys, via Zoom meetings. And so that outreach was incredibly important. And then I wanted to share on this slide, I thought I should explain the picture if we go back one. This student is not crying because there's a pandemic, though we might all have felt like we wanted to do that. This happens to be a Casey Scholars adult learner who has just been surprised with news that she received the Adult Learner Scholarship, and she is shedding tears of joy. And then if we go to the next slide, a few more items that campuses have shared in general support. KU Edwards in particular realized how important that financial aid access would be during the pandemic, especially if any of our adults lost jobs and created financial insecurity. So they made sure they had walk-in appointments available for adults with the financial advisors. They automated some of their communication for new students, and the students could schedule a Zoom meeting with their financial aid advisor. And then many of our campuses, realizing that funds were critical during this time, increased their scholarship funds and made sure that our adult learners knew of emergency loans and funds that were available to them. So our campuses did much. We shared a few of the items they did. They did so much more. And I would like to close my section with a quote, in fact, from Misty Chandler from KU Edwards. And Misty said that their campus was so pleased to be able to work with the Adult Learner 360 assessment. In fact, it validated the model they were using to support adults. They said that it has proven useful, but more important, motivational to the campus community. And Misty said, in fact, that they are using the 9 principles of effectively serving adult learners in everything that they do. So campuses, great job in taking the information and acting on it so that we support our adults as best that we can. And I'm going to turn it back to Robin.
Thank you so much, Beth. And thank you to each of the panelists for sharing just important information. These are just highlights from a larger study. Again, that full study is available at DeBruce.org. And in addition, there's also a shorter fact sheet summary that's available as well that lists out the 4 major recommendations and then the action steps that the research team put forward after reflecting and synthesizing all of the comments from learners and from academic leaders as well. Thank you for continuing to put questions in the chat. We'll go ahead and start with some of those. And feel free to, some of you have sent them directly, or feel free to do panelists and attendees so everyone can see those. I'm going to kick off. I think, Scott, you've already addressed a little bit of one of the questions that might be in there, but I'm going to just read that back out for people to address. So Scott, if you could touch on this. And this is this question about just information that we're seeing, and particularly in the Student Clearinghouse Research Center, about how adult student enrollment is growing in fall 2020, but that did not include community college. And to what do you attribute the growth? And then what can we do about the substantial decline in community college enrollment, if you have thoughts on that? And you're going to be on mute.
I knew I would do that. Thank you. I think the picture of enrollment is unclear in terms of the impact of COVID-19, but I think there's demographic indications of some modest growth in terms of high school graduates until 2026, and then that's going to decline over time. But we heard from some of our questioning with Kansas City scholar institutions that there was some uncertainty. They felt like some of them actually had better than expected enrollments. The thought was folks were staying closer to home in terms of their traditional enrollments. But I think there was also in terms of the community colleges, I think there's uncertainty about jobs, uncertainty about clinicals. There was some reluctance in terms of the transition to online, whether students wanted to participate in that. And so there's a myriad of factors, but I think folks are paying attention to the demographic side, but also, how is COVID-19 going to impact our economy?
Robin, I'd like to jump in on that one too, because we did hear from admissions directors that they were trying to do the virtual fairs and reach out. But Scott's absolutely right. This is difficult for people to come to those. And so it was very, very difficult year for recruiting. Most of the people in admissions and recruiting said, I'm just going to be nervous and stressed all year. I don't know how I'm going to feel 2021. And so I think this is something we need to look at. But I also think that the vision of a college degree is changing. And so we as institutions have to begin to think about how do we repackage this to meet the workforce needs.
And Scott and Robin and Royce-Ann, I wanted to add one positive thing since this study is focused on the Casey Scholars institutions, and there are 17. We're talking about enrollment, but I think the other thing to focus on is persistence. So our adult learners who are already in college, during the pandemic, are they persisting? And I can say that at the 17 campuses in the network, they are. We did not see a downturn in terms of persistence. And I think that is because of all the support. So all of the support that the campuses are providing, such as this study illuminates, and all of the support getting ready to go back to college. So if there's a light in the story, a bright light, it is how important the supports are to persistence, and our adults in this region are persisting, even during the pandemic.
Really helpful reflections. One of the questions I see is, and Royce-Ann, I'll direct this one to you. When you were talking about communication channels, what if we don't have staff to really break down communication to different audiences?
I think that is very difficult because we are all faced with financial issues at all of our institutions. But I will tell you, we interviewed some smaller institutions that did a great job at targeting their audiences and really just creating listservs for one of the things. But the other thing is to take this report and use it in your strategic planning and start thinking ahead of how we can really work on our institution. These were exposed during a pandemic, but here's a chance for us to take the information and improve what we're doing as we move forward, because we have to understand that adult learners need a different communication. And I think that's something we really have to step forward and keep cognizant of.
Yeah, we found out that the relationships were just so important. And those that had a positive two-way kind of personal dialogue with their advisors or a key person within the program really had a positive perspective on how well the institution managed itself during this pandemic. So, and those where that relationship wasn't there, that they came away feeling like a number, and that's exactly what we don't want to see happen.
There's a couple of questions that have come across thinking about that challenge in translating to a virtual environment and some of the things that make that really difficult. And we can touch on a couple of those. One of the specific questions, and to any of you have heard something about this, how colleges in this group or ones you know about handled new student orientations and handled that in the virtual environment.
New student orientations were done using Zoom. And, you know, we heard some very positive stories about that, that they had a better attendance, that they had many more people attending them through a Zoom, and that we're rethinking how we do new student orientations, because what some institutions learned is that they were missing their adult learner population. They couldn't come at the time that they always scheduled it. And so by doing it in a virtual setting, they had more adult learners at their orientations. And so I think that's an important piece, is to not go back to the way things maybe were, but what have we learned, and what are the things that we can continue doing? Because many of the people in our focus groups talked about this is what I learned, and this is going to stay with us as we go forward. We changed this and it was for the better.
There was also some just on a pragmatic level, there was some scheduling software that several of them used. And I'm blanking on the name of that, Royce, and maybe you remember, but
You book me.
yeah, Book Me, that really helped with some of the accountability and just the reminders, you know, on a pragmatic level of scheduling and having, you know, Zoom meetings. I know one institution talked about how they started Zoom meetings with a 45-minute window and reduced that down to about 15 minutes because they really felt like they were being able to interact in a way that was quality and got the information to the students that they were requesting.
Leaning into this kind of the transition of virtual, question about how are you able to move technical or hands-on training to a virtual environment? Did you all hear about that?
Oh, we did. We heard several of those, and it was very tough. I would say some of you did fantastic job of creating scenarios where students help students by using FaceTime in labs and where they had to have hands-on material. Nursing programs were the most innovative that we heard, that we got to talk to. But I also know that many people struggled with this. Many people have regulations that they had to stay face-to-face and hands-on. In your police academies and fire academies, these programs have to be done face-to-face. There are statutes that require it. And so finding ways to do that within a safe environment, almost using the same protocols of hospitals have used and transitioning that. But when you were able to also have a camera as close as possible shooting things, the stories we heard from faculty, I applaud many of them. They leaped tall buildings in my mind to create ways in which technology could spotlight things for students that were unable to be there.
Yeah, I think this was a great moment in time for many individual faculty members who maybe didn't know the opportunities or the possibilities that online pedagogy kind of offered. And as they got into the flow of things, we had some transformation in terms of their perceptions. So
really helpful. Thinking about metrics, and I'm thinking of each of you because all of you care about metrics and are so focused on metrics. Scott, I'm going to direct this to you because I know you have that kind of nationwide view a lot of times, but really any can answer. What kind of metrics do you see colleges and universities using to measure success in some of these efforts?
well, I think we've talked a lot already about enrollment, but I think the adult learners, most enrollment and retention and persistent data really relies on year 1 to year 2. But we also know that in accelerated and in many programs that attrition happens within the first 2 courses. And so really to have an appropriate retention measure, persistence measure, maybe from term to term for the adult learner population. So you're not missing out when there is an attrition issue. I think also creating a measure that really looks at the relationship between advisors and advisees, whether it's a satisfaction measure or not. But I think that's such a key relationship that keeping tabs on how that relationship is going, I think is really, really important.
I was going to add to that too, student satisfaction. So again, one of the themes from this study is, do we ask students, do we ask the adults, what's your experience? So asking students, I think, is a prime metric. The other thing I would say is having many of our campuses that in a prior time, and then this time 8 campuses that took the Adult Learner 360. One of the main things it does for a campus is let you understand in what ways are we adult learner friendly and where do we have gaps that can be improved. And that's based on opinions of faculty and staff, but I think most importantly, based on opinions of adult learners themselves. So I think one of the metrics is, do we keep coming back and saying, did we improve on our gaps? Where are we at this point? And not assume we take the AL 360 one time and that is relevant information for 5 or 6 years to come. So that constant yearning for, are we improving? What do the scholars say about it? What are adult opinions? And how can we yet do more and do better?
Really helpful.
That's great, Beth.
Yeah. Royce-Ann, in your comments, you lifted up the recommendation about mental health, and there's been several questions and comments around that. Do you want to share any other details or examples of how mental health might have been addressed, or what you heard in that regard?
We heard that students really were looking for counselors, or in many cases, we talked to several academic advisors who said, you know, they see the word advisor. And so they also think that we're counselors. And it was heavily on the academic advisors. They heard a lot of the stories of the adult learners and the juggling of my children at home, I'm working remotely, or I have to go to work. And what do? I have no daycare. And I can't continue in my courses because of all these things. I just can't. And so I think really having an online service to counseling, many of them would say, you know, we can come to campus, we have counselors here. But the response is many times, how do I do that when I still have children to take care of and these things? So moving that to a secure online system. And I think the pandemic also forced medical institutions to really move in that direction as well. But I think having that available, continuing for institutions to think about my learners at a distance, what can I do to serve them and help them through this particular process? So mental health was key. And Beth has referred to adult learners helping adult learners. Even in our focus groups, we heard them talking about, can we just come back and talk together again next week? Because this is so much helpful just to hear somebody else's story and how somebody else is navigating this. I need to hear from this. I need this kind of support. And so even the small step of putting together a weekly or a monthly group of adult learners and just listen to them. I do that in my own program for my doc students, and they flock because they just want to be heard.
I think that's also true of the professional staff. I mean, they're coping with these same issues, and then they have to be there for their students. So to the degree that an institution can invest in that professional development or support for their professional staff, we heard from a lot of advisors that were really feeling the weight of the world in terms of their feeling like they have to, you know, save the college for retention purposes and really are feeling that stress. And so to the degree that institutional leaders can show appreciation and show support in ways that are can really be, I think, a real plus and really helps for the long run for your professional staff.
Yeah, Beth, I'm going to direct this next question to you, because I think you always are thinking about how to reach adult learners and messages that resonate with them, and are so close to thinking about that group. And the question is, are there any insights from the research that could guide any new marketing campaigns for adult learners? So just thinking about what are people thinking about? What's resonating with you and the adult learners that you are connected to?
Yeah, thank you, Robin. That's a great question. I would say that adult learners need to understand that the campus wants adult learners. They understand how important they are, that it is not an overlooked population. I think sometimes we overlook adults, whereas in Kansas City, for instance, in this region, over 300,000 adults have some college, no degree. So I think the messaging has to say, we see you, we know you are there. We want adults on our campus, and this is an adult learner friendly campus. I think the themes we've heard today, flexibility, accessibility, for adults to know, can I fit this into my life while I'm juggling all these other many things? And so the messaging needs to say, yes, it's accessible, it's flexible, there is support. I really liked also what some of our campuses did in terms of action. They're looking at prior learning assessment. So I think that's another key message. Your experiences count. Talk to us. We'll help you figure out what program you might want to study. And then when campuses are offering more programs, be they certificate or credentials, be they online format, I think all of those things signal, yes, this is accessible. You can do this. We support you. And so I think all of those messages are key. There are probably others as well, but those are the ones that jump to top of mind.
Yeah, from a more national perspective, I think Kale is seeing a lot more related to guided pathways work, really being intentional about the pathway for a credential to advancement, or to reskill for a career change. And so especially 2-year schools are at the front end of this type of work, as we look at kind of a rapid recovery from COVID, hopefully sooner rather than later.
And actually, one of our participants in a focus group talked about a little bit of what Scott just mentioned, that career pathway. And could we, in the Kansas City area, let's institutions working together create a site so that adults could go and see which pathway to follow and which institution does it which way, and to really help them navigate this area. So I think even within the institutions, we're thinking ahead about this particular piece.
All really helpful comments. Royce-Ann, I'm going to direct this one to you to kick off. And it's really thinking about what practices that were enhanced or reimagined due to COVID do you think are going to continue as we move forward?
One of the major ones that's going to continue is, we drug our feet, and I say we because I'm a part of the higher education. It's my love of my life, but we drug our feet on forms. We had to have paper forms, and we walked them around on institutional grounds. You know what? We learned that we could convert those to fillable electronic forms, and it was just fine. And we learned about electronic signatures, and financial aid offices learned how to navigate this without you having to come see me during the day. Those practices we heard over and over, those will stay. We will stay with that. We also heard stories about, from a faculty point of view, saying, I was against this learning management system and using it, but I will never create another course or teach even a face-to-face course without building my course in this learning management, because it makes me be more organized. It made me think out things earlier in my course. It really helped me make it so that students saw how organized it is, and I can see the flow of it. That was another really strong practice. We heard about Zoom being continued with advising, with recruitment, with meetings. There was a time when, you couldn't meet unless you were face-to-face. So we're learning, and we're even learning that, we can have students in a classroom and others can join us via Zoom, and it works, and we can get everybody engaged in it. So we've learned so much from the pandemic. I know some of us, we think it's terrible, but the learning that we saw people talking about in these groups was just a wonderful phenomenon to see unfold.
Really helpful reflections. And this next question is about micro-credentials. I'm going to start with you, Beth, and I'll read you this question, but in part because I know you all have been thinking about this at KC Scholars, even in terms of what you support and in that regard. But the question is, we're seeing an increased need for micro-credentials, shorter term training aligned with immediate workforce needs. Are other people seeing this? And if so, how are you attending to this need?
So yes, absolutely. I think the pandemic heightened or escalated our understanding of the value of stackable credits, of certificates. You know, a 4-year degree is wonderful. It is for some. We are not diminishing that. But on the other hand, we're hearing more, all pathways are important, and especially for adult learners. And so, yes, KC Scholars, we are adding what we're calling stackable credits. We already have scholarships and students coming to our program at 9th grade, 11th, and as adult learners. But we are adding a stackable credits program. So short-term certificates, but with academic credit attached. And the beauty of that is that it usually is quicker. Usually someone knows exactly what area they want to go into. And then there's a connection, most usually, to an employer, even before you complete that certificate, and certainly upon completion. So it's a very specific, known pathway, quicker to get there, more connected to the workforce. And I think particularly right now, and as Scott said, you know, we're still not really fully understanding the impact of COVID. I mean, there is more to come, but we know there's a need for reskilling, upskilling. Many have lost their jobs. And so being able to complete a certificate or stackable credit and get right into a job that matters, you can make a good wage, there is a career pipeline there, and then you can perhaps go back and stack those credits later if you want to, then get an associate's degree or then get a bachelor's degree. So I think what we're going to see more is all these things mix and mingle so much more, instead of it's a straight pathway to one or a straight pathway to another, which I think is terrific. More pathways to possible for more individuals.
You know, I think there's some important work coming out of Harvard with around the 60-year curriculum. And I think that idea is that the student is going to be coming back. It's not just one episode, that the students are going to be coming back to higher education for reskilling and retooling. And that, you know, that's going to change, you know, higher education to, I think, focus more on short-term types of credentials that aren't necessarily degree oriented, that they're certificates and things that help get people back and advance into the workforce.
Terrific. Scott, I'm going to direct this next question to you, and I think we'll probably have one more after this one. But how do you recommend addressing the perception and attitude about adult learners by decision makers in higher ed, meaning getting buy-in to allocate resources equitably?
You know, and this happened to me as a dean. You know, it was tough to garner resources when it came budget time, because a lot of my anecdotes were just those, were anecdotes about, you know, how unbelievable and these adult learners were. But it helps to make the argument with, and the numbers speak to this. So I think there's great information out there. And I think, you know, an organization like Hale can help with those types of things. But to make the case of, there's a business case for serving this population. We know that, you know, states can't reach their degree attainment goals without addressing the needs of adult learners. And so I think the data is on your side. If you're trying to make that case on your campus or within your system, there's folks here to help you. And there's some great websites. Lumina has a great website on the, I think, the Strong report. And so there's lots of great resources out there.
Terrific. Roseanne, do you want to jump in on that?
Yes, I think you have to sometimes get them to have a personal experience with an adult learner too, and bringing them to the table and showing them how much they can contribute to their institution and how many there are. There's so many adult learners that are just trying to find a way to to achieve a degree, to achieve credentials, and they're working hard at this. Institutions just have to try a little bit harder.
Great point. Beth, I'm going to turn this last question back to you, but others can jump in as well. And I think that I'll also ask that for in the chat that the link to the full study and the summary sheet be dropped back into the chat. So for attendees, you can get a copy of that. But Beth, this is really thinking about some of the ways to advocate for the recommendations in this study, but thinking about the individual institution and the system level, where do you go or what do you recommend in that regard?
Yeah, so we hope, all of us hope that you will get a copy of this study, that you will look through, find those things that are relevant and germane to you, and then look for a few that you might not see immediate application, but then stretch yourself yet further. So one, use the findings that are here. I think advocating on a campus too, continually to talk about adults, continue to talk about the number of adults we have that could benefit. And I think ultimately too, Robin, look at the contributions our adults make. And look what we miss if we don't support the adults. In the case of Kansas City, it's 300,000. They've got lived experiences, skills, experiences, so much to contribute and so much to give. And so I think if we don't advocate for this and we don't embrace our adults, we're really missing a very important part of our community and of contributions that they can give. And I always try to tell myself, we dare not forget about adult learners. They are so incredibly important to the higher education ecosystem, but more importantly to our communities, to our workforces. So that's what I would do to advocate and hope that we all will do the same.
Thank you so much, Beth. That's probably a great message to leave on in terms of we dare not forget about adult learners. Thank you to each of you panelists and for the attendees just being here. I know you have not forgotten about adult learners and really appreciate your time and attention today and the work that you're doing in your own communities to smooth out that path for adult learners. Thank you so much.